see how much memory I have. All right. Okay, I guess we're recording now, guys. So we'll get our conversation started. My name, obviously, is Charlie, senior pastor at Memorial United Methodist Church. Do you guys just want to introduce yourselves briefly before we start our sort of formal conversation?
Yes, I am Pastor Granardo Felix, pastor of Trinity United Methodist Church in Fernandina. I've been serving with Trinity now for 2 years.
Thank you.
My name is Anthony Daniel, affectionately known as Pastor D, Reverend Daniel. I've been called worse though. But I have the privilege of serving at Macedonia AME Church in Fernandina Beach.
So part of our conversation today was really around, I told you already, sermon that I preached on Sunday in response to some of the things that we were hearing coming out of Brunswick, Georgia last week. And really, as I preached that sermon and as we've determined that we really just want to help people apply some of the things that we said in that sermon, I thought, it's time for me to stop making assumptions about what I think of the experiences of my friends in the African American community or in other minority communities in our nation. I guess just in turn, Anthony and Granardo, would you maybe share with me and by extension with our church family here a little bit about what your own experience of racism, racist tension in the United States has been? I don't even know the best way to describe it, but what has it been like in your experience and in your life here?
I was born and raised in New York, Harlem, and you used an interesting term early on before we started recording when you said a different and divided society. I didn't know that when I was growing up. When I was growing up in Harlem, that square block was my world. As a young man, as a young person, that square block was my world. I wasn't exposed to the world until my mother took me downtown on the subway when I had to go shopping for a suit. And I was introduced to white people. And it was a culture shock for me, living in a city that was a melting pot. So my first experience was very fascinating. I learned that there was other people other than me. I didn't know I was black. I didn't know I was white. I just knew I had friends, families, and people that cared and loved me and surrounded me. So, my experience when I was growing up was very, very sheltered. I want to use the word sheltered. And come to find out, the older I became, I grew. I realized not just was I being sheltered, I was being protected from some things that I didn't know that existed. So my first experience with racism happened to me on a subway when I was going to high school for the first time, because we went to junior high and elementary school in our neighborhoods. And when you go to high school, you usually go downtown, and I was excited. You get a bus pass, you get a train pass, you get to go and travel outside of your neighborhood. And my first day on the subway, I was going through the cars, and there was a white man coming the opposite direction, and we were merging together. And when we got together, he hit my shoulder so hard, I sort of like I could feel it right now. And I saw in his eye, I saw what I learned, the word contempt that he had for me. And I couldn't understand it. I just couldn't understand it. And it kind of changed my whole world. And then I said to myself, that'll never happen to me again. So I started lifting weights and got big and healthy, and people want to know, well, how big you get, how do you get that big? I say, you got to eat by the pound, you know? So when somebody, the whole idea now is when back then, and still to this very day, because we still live in a different and divided society, even to this very day. If you walk into me, it's going to be like walking into a wall. And that's going to be from self-defense. One last, I could go on, but when I got to high school, I was headed to college. And my guidance counselor told me, when I made up my mind and I was looking for a college, he told me, well, Mr. Zapp, I'll never forget him either. White guy, little, used to eat these thick peanut butters and sandwiches on whole wheat bread. And he told me, well, everybody doesn't have to go to college. You can be a bus driver. You can be a doorman. You can be a taxi driver. And I looked at him and I thought that was peculiar because I was in a college-bound course for the entire high school year. And I get to him looking for a high school, a college to go to, and he tells me everybody doesn't have to go to college. So these little experiences, you know. But that was just a couple of stories when I was growing up.
Hey, Granardo, how about you? Let me hear some of your experience.
Yeah. Well, my experience, of course, I was born in Jacksonville, and a lot like Anthony, I lived pretty much a sheltered life. I was born in 1963, and you're talking right in the heart of the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
And I really was, again, sheltered from a lot of the things that were going on. Long story short, that's how I was raised, but came from a very, very good, supportive home. And you know, I once racism showed its head, of course, like Anthony, I was in school. I was in a predominantly white school at the time. And I was a sports guy. I played football and I played basketball as well. The team settings were fine, but it was when I was in an organization called Future Farmers of America. That's when I began to experience it, because it was an organization of farmers. And living in, we had moved to Lakeland, Florida, which is, you know, Lakeland is the hub of the United Methodist organization, but it's also a rural area as well. And so I was in an organization called Future Farmers of America, and I was viewed as, of course, an outsider. I was called a lot of names, and that was my experience. But through that, it just showed me that people were incensed. They were enraged, and I often wondered where that came from. And I began to talk to family members about, how can a person look at me and assume certain things? And I'll never forget what one of my uncles had mentioned to me. He said, son, you're trying to fight against something that he pretty much told me that we're 400 years behind. And I never understood that until I began to just look at really what he was talking about. He said, how can you fight against something that you basically 400 years, but how will we ever catch up? And he said, if he said, let me explain it to you. If you're going to school with people and they have been taught a certain thing for ever since they were kids, and their uncles and their dads and their moms, if all they know is that you are inferior, then by the time they get out in the world and see what inferior looks like, and it has black skin, then that's going to be you. And when you are inferior in the eyes of another race, then you are demeaned. And if you are demeaned, you are devalued. And if you are devalued, then your life does not matter. And there's no way, in so many ways, in the literature that I'm looking at now, you don't even have to teach racism any longer, because it's almost embedded in the DNA in most cases, where a Black person is born, and as they grow older, they feel inferior, and it's something that they feel in their heart. And as a white person may grow, they may feel like they're superior, because it's just the way society portrays it.
Tell me, guys, obviously you both said that that racism continues to be a problem in our world today, and obviously that means that it's also a problem in some way, shape, or form here in Fernandina Beach. So tell me a little bit about how does it play out here in our local community, in ways that we may not see. You know, people like me, white people like me, might not see it. Tell me how you see it and how you experience it.
When I first arrived here, I saw object wealth and poverty. I saw poverty in the Black community, and I saw wealth in the white community. And it was a major divide, as if the real struggle is one of economics. You drive around the neighborhoods and you can see the dilapidated housing. You can see they try to keep the blight to a minimum, but you can see the conditions of the houses compared to the conditions of other houses, even older houses in, let's say, the historic district of downtown Fernandina. There's a marginal difference in aesthetics. Mm. And when I've spoken to other Blacks and African Americans, young and old, it's always about not having enough resources, not being able to sustain our life on the island. But it's just the everyday living. It's the mindset of being the lack thereof.
Granardo, how about you? What do you see locally?
And my perspective is one that, of course, Anthony and I are, pretty much on the front lines because we serve the community. And that's not to say that Memorial don't, but we tend to be in the community. Our members are from these communities. So once I began to actually get out and to actually try to arrange things for those that were at need, it caused me to have to go to some of the business owners who were white, such as bakery owners, to find out how we can get them to donate to the Hope House, which is what we do every third Monday of the month. And what I found with talking to some of the business owners was they didn't know that, in most cases, they didn't even know that we had homeless people in Fernandina or people that were in need. And once they found out, they were very generous with trying to support. But that was just one incidence where that was a business owner and they just didn't know. But Anthony and I were in a meeting where an outside couple came in, they just moved here, and they brought in a different perspective. They said that Fernandina is marketed differently outside of the city. In other words, they're marketing it without telling the outside people what's really going on inside. In other words, about America's beach. And they thought that, they would see a lot of Black people in that area because it was marketed as historically sound and they're in touch with everything. When they got here, they saw a different dynamic. So multi-million-dollar homes, and the Blacks were discouraged in living in poverty. And so it was very alarming to some of those people that had moved from up north to here. And I say that because in serving the community and reaching out and doing events to give back to our community, we see the disparity. We're living the disparity. My membership, part of them are living in those areas that they call the box. The box means that within that box, there's the Black community, and everything that surrounds the box is doing quite well. And all it takes is driving a few streets, and you can see the disparity, and you can see the poverty, and you can see the economic separation that we're speaking about. So those are the things that I've experienced just by being out there.
I want to also add, it's visible when it comes to the city's point of view, or whoever established the city, whoever's idea it was to have two rec centers, a black rec center, a white rec center. And these are messages that speak loudly to where we are as a community, how we see ourselves, and how we position ourselves for the future. Brother Pastor Felix mentioned something about that reminded me when it comes to not telling a story about Fernandina Beach. One thing I recognize also is that we do good feeding the problem. Once you're here and you recognize that there is a homeless, there is an issue, we do good feeding the problem, but we do less when it comes to advocacy. How can we eradicate this problem? I've never seen such a thing before, truly. I mean, we have what we call a Hope House, and they feed almost 5 days a week, 5 days a week. And then there's a group that wants to open up and start on Saturdays. But I don't hear anything about, well, how can we address these issues?
And I'm glad you bring it up, Anthony, because I think that's a deep frustration. Talking about racism, talking about poverty, talking about any of these social justice issues, we all have our hearts breaking about what the reality is for other people in our communities and in our lives. But we are so we're so confused, or we're so unknowledgeable as to what might actually be done to change in a way that encourages people to take forward steps in their lives, rather than just sort of giving resources which are needed in the moment, but which only perpetuate the problems that we're talking. So tell me, let me advance our conversation. Let me ask you. You're both clergy. I'm clergy too. What can the church do? What can your church do? What can my church do? What's the response that our churches can do that listen, none of us is kidding ourselves thinking that we're going to change the whole system, but what can we do right here where we live?
I guess I'll keep the lead, huh?
Yeah.
Well, let me lead into that, okay? I won't be long, because it's about reconciliation, but not the way most people think of reconciliation, as we're talking about the church. Because this matchless message of equality and unity was meant for the world, but it was entrusted to the church. This is my theology, okay? It's entrusted to the church. However, only when we have this diverse discipleship become one through love, will we be able to project this blessed message that truly we are of God. So if we're going to fix this, I think if we're going to fix this, it's important, because I appreciate this conversation, because it's important, because the demographics of our community are always going to be changing, always going to be changing. And where we're going to have to reach out to and address people that don't look like us. So if the gospel message is going to be, if we're going to be true to the gospel message, okay? So I believe this message is going to have to start from the church, and it's going to be one of reconciliation, because we have people who suggest that we can be reconciled to God without being reconciled to our brothers and sisters.
Mm.
And that's not a gospel message.
No.
When I came down that aisle, I'm going to sum this up. When I came down that aisle, when I was a black man, I gave my hand to the preacher, but I gave my life to Christ.
Amen. So
when I left that aisle, I was still a black man, but it was a transformation. And I believe that's what God is calling us to be transformed agents, because now I'm a Christian that happens to be a black man.
Yeah.
Yes.
So my identity with Christ comes first.
Amen.
So it's going to have to take that voice. That's the voice that the church is going to have to take. Perhaps God is using the uprising of evil and white supremacy and race inspired violence to bring us to a place where the church has to recognize that we have to take the lead. Yeah. So it's the church has to be reconciled to one another, because we can't be reconciled to God and not reconciled to each other. I'm talking about Christians. Amen.
So I hear you. I'm going to invite Granardo to speak too, yeah. But I also just want to say before you do, Granardo, my brother, I mean, this is our existence as United Methodists.
Yes.
Two separate churches, 2 blocks from each other. Yes. Under the same denominational banner, and so anyone that tells me that racism and segregation and division has not been and is not a problem here in this city, just look at the United Methodists. So,
absolutely, and I want to thank my brothers here. It's just been a wonderful conversation, and I'm going to make this real easy because I see it for what it is. And what it is, and we all can concur on this, it has to do with mindset. How we talk about reconciliation. We talk about we can reconcile with God, but we can't reconcile with our brother. That's a mindset. That is a mindset that is well alive in this community. How can, I'll never forget what our DS, Jay Farrell, when he was doing the last round of appointments. And Jay is a very thorough, honest guy, but he himself recognized that you had churches saying that they didn't want black pastors, black churches saying they didn't want white pastors, churches saying they didn't want women pastors, and vice versa. And every element, every level of racism you can think about existed in our United Methodist organization. So when we look at this, it points to a mindset. When you ask the question, what can the church do? The church can change its mindset. And that is a process. That's a process that has to start with dialect. It has to start with conversations. It has to start with what we're doing.
That's right.
There are some that when I made the statement of we're 400 years behind, they would ask, what does that mean? That means that we were enslaved for 400 years. We were belittled. We were raped. We were killed. We, every level of tragedy and things that could bring a person down was done to us. And it has perpetuated itself through generations. So it becomes a mindset. I would say the way that we can start in its most simplest terms is to have dialogue, is to have conversation. When people start to get the correct information, maybe they will start to see things a little differently. Maybe when they see me, they don't say, whoa, that's a black man. You got to, hold on to everything, right? We don't know what type of person that he is. Or just wait a minute, let's just see what we're dealing with here. When we get beyond that, when we can say, okay, if I see a black person, Why can't it be, you know what? Why can't we have compassion and say, look, this person obviously is behind the 8 ball here already. So let's just support them, and let's just move them as far as we can, and let's honor them because of what they have gone through. That's what I would like to see. But it changed. The mindset, I believe, is the first step. The dialogue part of that has to come into fruition.
Yeah. Granardo, as you were talking there, my mind just went straight. You talked about mindset, and my mind went straight to Paul writing his letter to the Romans,
Yes.
chapter 12, and
Yes.
the second
Yes.
verse there. Do not be conformed to this world, but be
Yes.
transformed by the renewing of your minds,
Of your
so that
mind.
you may discern what is the will of
Amen.
God, what is good and acceptable and perfect.
Amen.
Guys, I've got one more question for you.
And Charlie, I don't mean to cut you off, but let me
You
just
do
add
it.
this. but check this out. What we're doing with mentoring our kids, our young men, what I do on Saturdays is I'm trying to change the mindset. I'm trying to go into the communities with our young Black men and say, yes, it's great to be an NFL star and a basketball star, but what is your plan B? What is your plan C? That electrician can buy his mom that house.
That's right.
That plumber can live for the rest of his life on a good salary and provide for his families. So when we talk about what the church can do, it also starts in our communities as well, with changing the mindset of our young Black men as well.
Well, listen, hey, that brings me really well actually to the last question. When I preached on Sunday, I got plenty of good feedback from people, and pats on the back, and you said what we wanted to hear, what we needed to hear. You said what needed to be said, but a big part of it, the feedback was also this: everything that you said today, I believe, is right, but I don't know what to do with it. I don't know what to do more than fill out a Facebook post or sign a petition or give a donation to someone who's doing good work. So in terms of the church, and I'm talking local church, not just the church universal anymore. I'm talking about Memorial here. I'm talking about your church and my church, but primarily I'm talking about Memorial, about a white church, more or less. What can people who care to do something but don't know what to do, what would you say is maybe some of the best first steps that folks can take in this community to begin to know that they're doing something that is effective and is doing their little part to make a difference?
Well, for me, I would say just knowing our dynamic, Charlie, with what you're doing and with what we're doing, and observing. I've been very observant of the two congregations. Mm-hmm. I have older members of my congregation who love, what you guys are doing, but they won't go downtown because of what the mindset has been with back in their past.
Yeah.
And then I have progressive members that have moved here from California that feels as though, the bigger white churches are they have tunnel vision, so to speak, or they can't see, to the left or to the right. The thing is that you ask, what can we do? Yeah. And I will put it out there, and I have just a vision that the Holy Spirit has placed on me that somehow sees the congregations or certain leaders of the congregations. If the congregations don't want to participate, you may have to have certain, you may have to poll the mindsets of your congregation and see if you have some that are willing to have the conversation, or some that are willing to come and to sit down with people that are not like them, and to just have the same type of dialogue that we have. I've always believed that that's where it starts.
Me too.
And I think that from that, then we could say, well, you know what? We have volunteers that go to America's Youth, that are going in the communities, that are trying to make that are tutoring our kids. That's great. That's a start. And you have people in your congregation that's doing that.
Yeah, we do.
And you need to be commended for that, because little things like that is where we start. But on the bigger picture, we're talking about, we have some Black churches in this community that does not get a dime from anybody. I think the compassion of resources can help our community. I think that if you guys have a certain level of funding that can go outside, or ministries that, and you have ministries that you have funding that you can support ministries on the outside of the Methodist church. They're right here in your community, but not just write a check.
Yeah.
Just try to sit down and have some dialect. And I believe that can be that's the most simplest place that I think would not infringe on anyone's whatever level of giving back that they're thinking about. I think that's the basic way that we can do something.
So conversations where it starts, and take action where you can, right? Show up.
Yes.
It's showing up.
Go up. Yes.
And Anthony, you got anything to add there?
Sure. I would like to my answer is in a challenge to take action, a challenge to change and accountability, being a part of the discussion, being a part of the solution. I started Bridging the Gap several years, my first year here, and it had an amazing response in regards to improving the relationship between African American and law enforcement. What evolved out of Bridging the Gap is one of the pillars now is cracking the code. Cracking the code, the mission is to build racial unity in our community through education, through outreach, awareness, activism, and service. However, cracking the code, it's engaging the head, it's engaging the heart, it's engaging the hands, including a healthy and in-depth conversation surrounding cultural diversity and social justice and inequalities in our community. And it's something that you can actually be a part of, to engage in and have that conversation in a setting where each of us, Black and white, can discuss the disparities, I understand them, but more importantly, get to know each other and what are some of the issues. Because I love the idea that ignorance, it's not necessarily a bad word, it's just something that you don't know. And when you become aware of it, we've made it sound like it's a bad word, but it's not. So we just need to educate ourselves. We need to get to know each other. So I would challenge and invite you to come to Cracking the Code once we get this social distancing thing together and what we're going to do. I'm going to be spending Hey, that's something I think the churches could do. And if we can't get to the pastors, then we need to engage the congregations, the laity.
Yeah. Listen, my friends, thank you.
Thank you.
From the bottom of my heart, thank you for joining me for a conversation today. May it be the first of many. Yes. And may the participants numbers expand as well.
Right.
Guys, we've all been called, we've all been ordained, or we're on our way to an ordination or whatever's happening, but we are leaders in the local church. And I think what we said about the ministry of reconciliation is a ministry that is given to the church, and it's part of being a follower of Christ is being willing to take on that ministry of reconciliation. So listen, thank you for today. I'm gonna stop recording now, and I appreciate you both so much.
I appreciate you.
Yes,
you too, brothers.
Yeah, doing an awesome job, Charlie. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.